They found the numbers carved into the flesh of their dead. Zelver warlords, towering and invincible, stood frozen on the battlefield, their claws dripping with the blood of fallen human soldiers. Yet they did not cheer. They did not claim victory. Because when they pried open the clenched fists of the corpses, they found numbers, etched into skin, burned into armor, scrawled onto shattered weapons. Dates. Coordinates. Memories carved in flesh. And the moment their greatest minds deciphered the meaning, the galaxy's strongest empire knew fear. The bodies of human soldiers lay twisted on the blood-soaked ground, their weapons still clenched in death grips. The Zelver warlord, High Marshal Vraxus, towered over the battlefield, his biomechanical armor drenched in crimson. The city's last defense had fallen. Victory was his. And yet, there was no satisfaction. The humans had fought like demons, relentless and unyielding, throwing themselves into battle with reckless abandon. Even as they were slaughtered, they laughed, some with defiance, others in a quiet, knowing way. Vraxus had waged wars for centuries, but he had never seen warriors smile at their own destruction. He crouched beside one of the human corpses, a soldier with a shattered helmet, his face half burned from plasma fire. Vraxus reached for the man's limp arm and pushed aside the torn sleeve. There, etched into his flesh, was a series of numbers. Vraxus frowned. "What is this?" One of his lieutenants, Vorker, stepped forward. "High Marshal, we've found these marks on all of them. Different sequences, but always the same pattern." Vraxus' sharp, metallic fingers traced the ink. June 6, 1944. "It means something," he muttered. "Find out what?" Vorker hesitated. "We should burn the bodies. Erase them." Vraxus shot him a look. "No. We must understand them first. These humans are not like the others we have crushed. There is something deeper at play." A voice crackled through his communicator. "High Marshal, we have captured one alive." Vraxus stood. "Bring him to me." Two Zelver enforcers dragged a battered human forward, shoving him to his knees. His face was bruised, his breathing ragged, but his eyes, his damn eyes, burned with something Vraxus had come to recognize. Not desperation. Not fear. Conviction. The human smirked through bloody teeth. "Let me guess, you want to know about the numbers?" Vraxus crouched in front of him. "You will tell me, one way or another." The soldier coughed, spitting blood onto Vraxus' armored boot. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." The human grinned wider. "You think you've won here, don't you?" Vraxus narrowed his eyes. "We have won." The soldier chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't get it. You never will. We don't fight for land. We don't fight for power. We fight because we remember." "Remember what?" The human leaned in, his voice a whisper but somehow more thunderous than any war cry. "Everything." Vraxus glanced at the numbers again. "A date. A location?" The soldier nodded. "A battle. Not the first. Not the last. Just one of many. That number on my arm? It belonged to men who ran through bullets, who stormed ashore knowing they wouldn't see the sunrise. They died screaming, bleeding, but they did it anyway. And you think this?" He gestured at the ruined city, at the bodies littering the streets. "You think this will break us?" Vraxus felt something he had not in centuries. A flicker of doubt. "Your history means nothing," he growled. "You are dead. Your world burns. This is your end." The human exhaled sharply, as if amused. "You've got it backward, Tin Can. You just gave us another date to remember." Vraxus straightened. "You are beaten. You have no reinforcements coming. Your people are scattered." The soldier's smirk never faded. "That's what the last ones said. The ones before them. And the ones before that. You don't understand, do you?" The Zelver around them stood motionless, waiting, watching. Vraxus' voice dropped, barely above a whisper. "Then tell me." The soldier took a breath, his next words slow and deliberate. "We do not kneel. We do not forget. We do not break. You think you've won?" He laughed, a deep, guttural sound that sent a shiver through even the most hardened Zelver. You've only made us stronger. Vrax's fist slammed into the soldier's gut, sending him sprawling onto the ground. Enough! But even choking on his own blood, the human grinned. The Zelver enforcers hesitated. They had seen the same numbers, the same defiance, on every single human corpse. They had fought enemies that screamed, that begged, that surrendered. Humans did neither. Vraxus turned sharply. Send the numbers to the High Council. I want a full analysis. Vorkar hesitated. If they are a weakness, then we will exploit it. Vraxus interrupted. But his voice lacked conviction. He looked down at the human again. He should have felt satisfaction. Instead, he felt something far worse. Dread. Because for the first time in his long, war-filled existence, he wondered if the humans could actually win. The silence in the war chamber was thick, suffocating. High Marshal Vraxus stood at the center, staring at the holographic display of the numbers. Every general, every strategist, every intelligence officer present had the same look, unease. Vraxus exhaled sharply. Tell me what they mean. The head strategist, Keldrin, stepped forward, voice cautious. The numbers correlate to battle records. Human history. We accessed their archives through captured data logs. The patterns are disturbing. Vraxus' fingers flexed. Elaborate. Keldrin swallowed. Every human soldier we have encountered, every single one, bears a number. We have matched them to events. Wars. Massacres. Acts of defiance where the odds were impossible, yet humanity survived. He changed the display. The numbers shifted into battle names. D-Day. Stalingrad. The fall of New Tokyo. The siege of Earth. Dates of blood and fire. Vraxus' eyes narrowed. These are meaningless relics. Keldrin's voice remained firm. That's what we thought. But then we noticed something else. He highlighted another set of numbers. These aren't ancient wars. Some are from events that have not happened yet. A slow ripple of shock passed through the chamber. One of the warlords leaned forward. Explain. Keldrin's voice lowered. Humans tattoo these numbers because they are not just remembering the past. They are committing to the future. The weight of his words hung heavy. Vraxus growled. You're suggesting they ink their own defeats before they happen? Keldrin exhaled. No, High Marshal. They tattoo them to ensure those battles are won. Silence. Vraxus turned back to the hologram. That's absurd. The head intelligence officer finally spoke. Is it? We have studied human psychology. They are unique. No species fights like them. They do not erase pain. They embrace it. They brand it onto their flesh, carry it into battle, and wield it as a weapon. A young officer muttered, almost to himself. They make pain a rallying cry. Vraxus' claws curled into a fist. Foolish sentiment. They die the same as any other. Keldrin hesitated. Do they? He flicked the display to the last battle reports. A single human platoon held for 5 days against our best mechanized divisions, armed with only scavenged weapons. Every single one of them bore the same date. Vraxus felt something heavy settle in his chest. Keldrin continued. They knew they would die there. And yet they fought anyway. Another general scoffed. This does not make them invincible. No, Keldrin admitted. But it makes them something worse. Unstoppable. Vraxus turned sharply. Then we erase the numbers. Ban their rituals. Break their memory. The intelligence officer hesitated. We tried. Vraxus' voice turned sharp. And? They don't need records, High Marshal. They don't need monuments or history books. They have each other. Their stories spread like fire. Take away their archives, and they will write history on their skin. Burn their cities, and they will whisper the names to their children. Erase their past, and they will carve the future with their bare hands. Vraxus slammed his fist into the war table. Enough. He turned to Keldrin. Your recommendation? A long pause. We destroy them. All of them. Another warlord nodded. If they live, they will remember. And if they remember, they will return. Vraxis exhaled slowly. A preemptive annihilation. There was no other way. Humanity had survived because of its own pain, but pain could be buried. He turned. Mobilize the fleet. Target Earth's memory centers first. Every record, every archive, every cultural stronghold. We will not just kill them. His eyes glowed with cold determination. We will erase the idea of them. The first strike came without warning. Earth's skies split open as Zelver warships rained destruction upon the planet. Cities crumbled under orbital bombardments. The great archives, the last vaults of ancient human knowledge, shattered in fire. They did not aim for strongholds. They did not target weapons. They targeted memory itself. The Zelver believed they had struck the final blow. That with the fall of records, the fall of words, the fall of history, humanity would shatter. They were wrong. Because humanity had never relied on stone and ink alone. The Zelver ground forces met resistance immediately. Not military grade, not organized command, just people. Civilians, barely armed, fighting like gods of war. Vraxis watched from the command ship, frowning. Why do they still resist? Their world is lost. The image on screen shifted to a captured city block. A dying soldier, barely able to stand, dragged a knife through the dirt. His fingers scrawled something into the ground. A date. Vraxis felt something stir in his gut. Even as they burned, they were writing the next war. His second-in-command's voice was tight. We cannot make them forget. The battle reports came in rapid succession. Earth had fallen. But its people had not. In the ruins, they cut new numbers into their flesh. Today's date. A declaration. A promise. A transmission came through. Not from a fleet. Not from a warlord. But from a single, lone survivor. The screen flickered, and there he was, Darius Kane. Bloodied. Burned. Smiling. Vraxis inhaled sharply. Kane exhaled, voice hoarse but strong. Nice try. Vraxis leaned forward, his claws digging into the metal. Kane wiped blood from his mouth. You think you've won? That you can break us by erasing our history? But history isn't books. It isn't monuments. It's us. He gestured to the ruins behind him, to the humans still fighting in the streets, still carving numbers onto their own skin. We don't need archives, Kane continued. We don't need statues. We are our own monuments. Vraxis' breath was slow. Controlled. You will fall. Kane grinned. We already fell. And guess what? We got back up. His hand rose, and with slow, deliberate precision, he burned today's date into his own arm. You just gave us another battle to win. The screen cut. Vraxis stood there, motionless. The chamber behind him was silent. The realization settled in his mind like a black hole. They had not wiped history. They had not broken them. They had given them more numbers. And as long as those numbers remained, humanity would never die. Vraxis stood alone in the war chamber, his mind a battlefield of its own. Reports scrolled across the display, confirming the destruction of Earth's greatest archives, the obliteration of its historical centers, the systematic purging of human records. And yet they still fought. He turned as Keldrin entered, his expression grim. It's done, Keldrin reported. Every major historical vault, every planetary archive, gone. Vraxis remained silent. They can't rebuild what they can't remember. Keldrin continued, but there was something in his tone. A hesitation. Vraxis turned. Say what you're thinking. Keldrin's jaw tightened. I don't think it worked. The words were a weight in the room. Vraxis's claws tapped against the war table. Explain. Keldrin pulled up the latest intercepted footage. Not military transmissions. Civilian. The Zelver had expected mourning, despair, surrender. What they found instead was defiance. A mother kneeling beside her child, pressing a blade to her forearm. cutting numbers into her own flesh, whispering their meaning to her son. A dying soldier, his last breath spent carving a date into the shattered walls of a ruined city. A captured human prisoner laughing as his captors stripped away his uniform, revealing numbers burned deep into his chest. Keldrin exhaled. They aren't just remembering. They're spreading it. Vraxis clenched his fists. How? Keldrin's voice was quiet. They don't need books. They don't need statues. They are the records. Vraxis exhaled sharply. Then we kill them all. Keldrin hesitated. I don't think that will be enough. Vraxis slammed his fist against the table. Then what do you propose? Keldrin was silent. The comms officer cut in. Incoming transmission. Human frequency. Vraxis turned, eyes narrowing. Patch it through. The display flickered. And there he was. Darius Kane. Bloodied. Bruised. But very much alive. And smiling. Vraxis took a slow step forward. You should be dead. Kane wiped blood from his mouth. Should be. Ain't. Vraxis studied him. We erased your past. Burned your history. Kane chuckled. You really don't get it, do you? Vraxis's eyes narrowed. Enlighten me. Kane's voice dropped. We don't fight for records. We don't fight for monuments. You think we carve numbers onto our skin just to remember? He leaned forward. We do it so we never stop fighting. Vraxis remained silent. Kane continued. Every number you erased? It's already been rewritten. It's in our skin, in our blood, in our bones. You didn't destroy our past. You just gave us another reason to win. Vraxis exhaled slowly. You are outnumbered. Your world burns. Your resistance is scattered. Kane's grin widened. You ever read about Stalingrad? The Alamo? Thermopylae? We do some of our best work when we're outnumbered. Vraxis kept his voice measured. You cannot win this war. Kane's expression didn't change. Then why are you so afraid? A flicker of irritation crossed Vraxis's face. I am not afraid. Kane's smirk remained. Then why are you talking to me instead of celebrating? Vraxis's jaw tightened. Kane leaned closer to the screen. You're starting to understand, aren't you? Vraxis didn't respond. Kane exhaled. You thought wiping our records would break us. That if we forgot, we'd weaken. He shook his head. You don't understand us at all. You ever see what happens when humans lose everything? We don't disappear. He pressed his fingers against his arm, tracing fresh scars. We rebuild ourselves from the ashes. Vraxis kept his voice cold. Your planet is gone. Kane's grin widened. You're about to find out what happens when you take everything from us. Vraxis stared at him. Then the screen cut to black. The war chamber was silent. Keldrin's voice was quiet. They're not breaking. Vraxis exhaled sharply. Then we will grind them into dust. Keldrin hesitated. High Marshal. Vraxis turned sharply. What? Keldrin's voice was careful. What if that's exactly what they want? The silence that followed was deafening. The war room was silent, save for the steady hum of data streams feeding in from the front lines. Vraxis stood motionless, staring at the reports as if they would suddenly offer a solution to the impossible. He was not a creature of doubt, but something unfamiliar churned within him now. They aren't stopping. Keldrin's voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it. Vraxis didn't look up. No species fights without an end. Keldrin hesitated. Then explain them. The battle reports spoke for themselves. Entire human battalions had been annihilated. Cities turned to rubble. Their greatest records erased. And yet, the war was not ending. Instead, it was spreading. Captured transmissions showed scattered human forces rallying in the ruins, carving new numbers into their arms. They should have been broken, leaderless, lost. But instead they fought harder. Vraxis exhaled sharply. This is their last stand. They throw themselves against us because they have nothing left. Keldrin's jaw tightened. That's what we keep telling ourselves. Vraxis turned. You think otherwise? Keldrin hesitated only for a moment. I think we were wrong about them. We assumed they fought for survival. But they don't. Vraxis's gaze was cold. Then what do they fight for? Keldrin exhaled. To win. The room darkened as a new transmission came through, intercepted from human resistance channels. The screen flickered, resolving into the image of Darius Kane. Still alive. Still fighting. His face was bloodied, armor scorched, yet his expression was calm. There was no fear in his eyes. Only certainty. Vraxis leaned in. He should be dead. Keldrin's voice was barely above a whisper. They all should be. Kane exhaled, wiping blood from his mouth. If you're watching this, congratulations. You wiped our records, burned our cities, and crushed our defenses. He smiled. And it wasn't enough. Vraxis's hands clenched into fists. Kane continued. You wanted to erase us. But you don't get it. We are not history. We are the ones who write it. Vraxis spoke through gritted teeth. He's grandstanding. Keldrin's gaze didn't leave the screen. Is he? Kane leaned forward. The numbers you burned? They're not lost. They're not gone. You just made sure we remember them forever. He raised his arm. The camera zoomed in. Fresh ink. A new number burned into his skin. Today's date. Vraxis felt something cold settle in his gut. Kane's voice dropped lower. You tried to break us. Instead, you gave us another battle to win. And that's the mistake every empire makes when they come for us. He smiled, sharp and fearless. You don't understand what happens when humans lose everything. Vraxis found himself whispering, almost involuntarily. What happens? Kane's grin widened. We get meaner. The transmission cut. Silence. Keldrin turned slowly. High Marshal, we need to consider. Vraxis slammed his fist onto the war table. Enough. Keldrin stiffened. Vraxis exhaled through gritted teeth. They are weaker than us. We have crushed species greater than them. If they refuse to break, we will grind them into nothing. Keldrin hesitated. And if nothing is exactly where they fight best? Vraxis said nothing. The battle reports kept coming in. The war wasn't slowing. It was escalating. Humans weren't retreating. They were advancing. New strongholds. New offensives. New numbers. And for the first time in his life, Vraxis understood what it meant to fear the dead. Vraxis stood at the heart of the Zelver War Command, his hands clenched behind his back as the battle reports streamed in. They were winning. That was undeniable. Their warships dominated the void, their ground forces crushed resistance wherever they landed, and yet, the war refused to end. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't numbers. It was something else. Something he couldn't quantify, something that defied logic. Keldrin entered without waiting for permission, his expression unreadable. High Marshal. Vraxis didn't turn. Speak. Keldrin hesitated. We intercepted another transmission. Vraxis exhaled slowly. Darius Kane again? Keldrin nodded. Vraxis's jaw tightened. Put it through. The screen flickered. Static. Then Kane. Blood smeared across his face, an open wound along his forehead, but his eyes still burned with that same unyielding fire. The background was chaos, a city in flames, explosions in the distance, the screams of war. And he was smiling. Vraxis inhaled sharply. Kane's voice was rough, hoarse, but steady. Hey there, Vraxis. You still watching? The Zelver warlord didn't answer, but Kane laughed like he'd heard him anyway. Thought so. You seem like the type who needs to see it for himself. Vraxis remained silent. Kane's grin widened. So, how's it feel? You burned our records, erased our monuments, wiped out our history, and yet here we are. Still fighting. Vraxis growled, his fingers flexing. You are losing. Kane tilted his head. Am I? Vraxis forced himself to stay calm. Your forces are broken. Your planet is in ruins. You have nothing left. Cain exhaled. That's the thing, Vraxis. You don't get it. We never fight because we have something left. We fight because you won't take what we are. Vraxis's throat tightened. Cain wiped the blood from his mouth and lifted his arm. The camera zoomed in. A fresh tattoo. Another number. Today's date. Cain's voice dropped lower. You just gave us more to remember. The war room was dead silent. Cain continued. You thought burning our past would make us weak. But it only gave us a reason to carve the future. And you're starting to feel it, aren't you? That sinking feeling in your gut. That whisper in the back of your mind. His smile faded. You know this doesn't end with us. Vraxis stiffened. Cain's voice was quieter now, but somehow heavier. Because the moment you made this war about erasing us, you made sure we'd never stop fighting. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not 1,000 years from now. Keldrin exhaled sharply. Cain's eyes didn't waver. We are not just men. We are not just soldiers. We are memory. We are vengeance. We are the weight of every battle, every fallen brother, every war you tried to erase. He leaned in, his voice a whisper that shook the room. And as long as we remember, you will never win. Vraxis's fists clenched. Cain smiled one last time. See you in the next war. The screen cut to black. The silence stretched long, suffocating. Keldrin spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. Hi, Marshal, we need to leave. Vraxis turned slowly. Keldrin's face was pale. We thought we were fighting a war. He swallowed. We were wrong. We started something else. The battle reports kept coming in. New skirmishes. New offensives. New strongholds rising from ashes that should have been graves. New numbers. Vraxis closed his eyes. For the first time in his existence, he understood fear.